had written to all of the colleges and schools that I might have thought of applying to, and told them that they should under no circumstances accept me as a pupil because this would be a corrupting influence upon the morals of the other students. I believe that he did at one point in the letter refer to me as sociopathic, which I think was rather harsh. The same thing applied with jobs. Any job that I was applying for meant that I would need a reference from the school, and the references I was getting from the school were kind of the antimatter equivalent of references. Thus, the only jobs that I could get were ones that just didn't give a damn who they employed. So I found myself working at a skinning yard and tannery at the bottom of Bedford Road in Northampton, which was probably one of the bleakest places that I've ever encountered, where you would turn up at 7:30 in the morning and drag huge, heavy, dripping sheepskins out of vats of mingled blood, urine, water and excrement. That the only relief from this was the concentration camp humour of throwing chopped off testicles at each other as a break to the monotony. And it was indeed monotonous. I was expelled from that job after a couple of weeks for smoking dope in the mess room, which really wasn't improving my career curve any. The next job I was able to get was that of a toilet cleaner at a hotel, and it more or less went downhill from there until I finally ended up as a comics writer. Quitting my day job and starting my life as a writer was a tremendous risk. It was a fool's leap, a shot in the dark. But anything of any value in our lives, whether that be a career, a work of art, a relationship, will always start with such a leap. And in order to be able to make it, you have to put aside the fear of failing and the desire of succeeding. You have to do these things completely purely, without fear, without desire. Because things that we do without lust of result are the purest actions that we shall ever take. I originally, having delusions of adequacy as an artist, had both drawn and written some strips for one of the music papers and for a local paper. After a couple of years, I'd realised that I could not draw well enough or fast enough to ever make any kind of career from this. And so I'd started to look into the possibilities of actually writing comic strips for other people to draw. This had landed me a couple of early jobs at places like 2000 AD and the British Doctor Who Monthly and Weekly that were published around that time. I learnt my craft doing very short stories, 3 or 4 pages each, which is an excellent way to learn writing of any sort. Progressed to doing a couple of series where I'd got a little more say in the nature of the material and was able to take more chances, to be a bit more experimental. And these started to win awards in Britain, which impressed the Americans no end. The Americans tend to think that every award is an Oscar and didn't realise that the comic industry awards are all voted for by 30 people in anoraks with dreadful social lives. And so, as far as they were concerned, if I was an award winner, then I was an English genius. And so they brain drained me to America and set me to working on DC Comics' Swamp Thing title, which caused a bit of a stir and at least made DC trust me enough to give me other projects, again allowing me more or less to write whatever I felt like writing. This led to Watchmen in the middle 80s, and that was one of the books that was responsible for the ridiculous blizzard of publicity that comic books, or graphic novels as somebody in a marketing department had decided by then that they should be called, became popular. I got into the swing of my writing career in the very early 1980s, which was a very overcast time politically. Most of the liberal world was watching in horror at the inexorable rise of the Reagan-Thatcher right-wing fuck-buddy coalition, the same time we had elements of fascism starting to make themselves prevalent upon the streets of Britain with the rise of the National Front. And all in all, things were looking fairly bleak. I decided that if I wanted to write about this grim present, the best way to do it was in the form of a story set in the future, which is by no means a new trick. Most dystopian science fiction is not actually about the future, it is about the times in which it was written. And the script that I came up with, V for Vendetta, was no exception. This was set in what at the time seemed an unreachably distant period in the future, which was 1997. And Britain had been taken over by a coalition of fascist groups, with a very romantic anarchist adventurer set in opposition against that. To get over the idea of fascism, I needed some symbol that would convince the readers that they were looking at a fascist police state. The thing that I finally settled upon was the idea of security cameras mounted upon every street corner and watching every move. I figured, yeah, that looks pretty much like fascism in action, and the readers were equally impressed, and apparently so were government figures who must have been reading it at that time, and decided that security cameras at every street corner of the metropolis was indeed just what we needed for the late 1990s.
Good evening, London. It's 9 o'clock, and this is the Voice of Fate, broadcasting on 275 and 285 in the medium wave. It is the 5th of the 11th, 1997. The people of London are advised that the Brixton and Streatham areas are quarantine zones as of today. It is suggested that these areas be avoided for reasons of health and safety. Police raided 17 homes in the Birmingham area earlier this morning, uncovering what is believed to be a major terrorist ring. 20 people, 8 of them women, are currently in detention awaiting trial. Queen Zara today appeared at the opening of a new waste reclamation plant in Leicester. This was the Queen's first public appearance since her 16th birthday in June. The Queen was wearing a suit of peach silk, created specially for the occasion by the Royal Couturier.
Watchmen also grew out of the politically shadowy landscape of the 1980s, when the Cold War was probably at its hottest in 20 or 30 years, and when nuclear destruction suddenly seemed a very real possibility. Watchmen used the cliches of the superhero format to try and discuss notions of power and responsibility in an increasingly complex world. We treated these fairly ridiculous superhuman characters as more human than super. We were using them as symbols of different kinds of ordinary human being rather than as different super beings. I think there were probably quite a few things about Watchmen which chimed well with the times, but to me perhaps the most important was the actual storytelling, where the world that was presented didn't really hang together in terms of linear cause and effect, but was instead seen as some massively complex simultaneous event with connections made of coincidence and synchronicity. And I think that it was this worldview, if anything, that resonated with an audience